Quite
Well,
audible, yeah.
it's such an honor to be here today, and I'm so glad that you guys accepted our invitation for our launch. Um, our clinic, our decolonization clinic, is launching today, as you all know, and we decided to choose today's date because we wanted to stand with our brothers and sisters of South America for the Soweto Uprising, and remember the young kids that were essentially murdered by the government without any recourse because they decided to speak against something that should never have been imposed on them. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what our clinic, our mission and our vision is, and then we're going to pass it on to other people who are going to kind of let you know about why we're here, and we're going to watch a film and get a discussion going. So the mission and vision of the DHRC.
The light repair, light ordinary light.
Maybe we'll ask Advocate Badella to mute as well.
Okay, I think everyone's muted now. All right, so the mission and the vision of our clinic is to bring or to use legal remedies to disrupt, dismantle, and ultimately destroy colonial relationships that continue to exist on the continent of Africa and throughout the African diaspora. To accomplish this mission, the DHRC actively seeks to confront imperialist actors who enforce their morality or their monetary interests by demonstrating the economic, politics, and culture of African people. So with that said, I would like to thank you all for being here, and I want to go ahead and pass it on to our next speaker.
Good morning. Our name is Ron Isaac with the National Conference of Black Lawyers. The DHRC will be a project of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. NCBL is an association of lawyers, judges, law students, scholars, legal workers, and legal activists that was formed in 1968 to be the legal arm of the struggle for Black liberation. We view our mission as advocating for and protecting the rights of the disadvantaged, striving to achieve self-determination for the people of Africa and African communities throughout the diaspora, and working in coalition with like-minded individuals and organizations to end the oppression of all people. NCBL has provided support, legal support, and professional support to individuals and groups consistent with this mission. We have organized and participated in delegations to national and international conferences and programs that address issues relevant to our mission. We have created educational programs for the public on matters of concern to Black and allied communities. Some of the noteworthy clients NCBL has represented over the years are Angela Davis, Assata Shakur, the Attica Brothers, Geronimo Pratt, Ben Chavis and the Wilmington 10, and Mumia Abu Jamal. While NCBL's primary concern has always been the welfare of the Black community in America, we recognize that the Black liberation movement in the United States is inseparable from the struggles for liberation, human rights, and self-determination going on throughout the world. Consequently, NCBL has always stood shoulder to shoulder with those who fought and continue to fight throughout Africa for liberation from Western colonialism and imperialism. From South Africa, Namibia, Angola to Zimbabwe, we have seen their fight as our fight. And we continue to push for Africa's economic freedom and the demilitarization of the African continent from outside forces. We have called on the nations of the world to recognize the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people for independence and self-governance in a viable nation free from Israeli oppression and military dominance. And to that end, cease all financial and military aid to Israel that fuels its apartheid and imperialist policies. NCBL has long supported the revolutionary government of Cuba and the Cuban people. We have lobbied against US interference in Cuban affairs and an end to US efforts to obstruct Cuba's ability to engage in free trade and comity with whatever nations it so chooses. And NCBL has called for the right to self-determination for the non-self-governing territories around the world now subject to US control. NCBL views the newly birthed Decolonization and Human Rights Clinic as a manifestation of our mission. While the clinic will be a self-governing entity, it will partner with NCBL in its goals and objectives. And NCBL will serve as a guiding hand to help steer it along its way and provide support as needed. We are proud to work with the clinic as it embarks on this journey. Now, to commemorate the 45th anniversary of the Soweto Uprising in Africa, South Africa, we will view a short documentary on that historic event.
Since June the 16th, when South African troops and police opened fire on a peaceful school children's demonstration, the white government has presided over the largest massacre of its black population since South Africa came into existence. Hundreds of blacks have died, thousands have been wounded, but the white Prime Minister says there is no crisis. The killings started in Soweto, the huge black township outside Johannesburg. On June the 16th, Soweto's school children gathered in protest against the introduction of compulsory teaching in Afrikaans, the main dialect of the ruling white minority. They met dogs, tear gas, and bullets. The schoolboy who led that day's protest was 19-year-old Tsetsi Mashinini.
All of a sudden, they just went out of their cars and came advancing towards us. The first white policeman threw a tear gas. It was the first time we saw a tear gas can. We didn't know even what it was. So when we saw it emitting smoke, we dispersed. And when we came back again. Maybe we thought they would talk to us through a loudspeaker or something like that. All of a sudden, the same policeman who threw the tear gas canister opened fire on the students. I was with Hector Peterson when he was shot. The boy was in that picture where a boy was carrying. He was the first student I saw going down. I saw him being shot on the head and he fell down. I could not believe it. I saw a boy of about 11 going down under police fire. I could not believe it. Apparently, when Hector was shot, the students ran back and I was left with Hector and a girl. I was feeling scared and I wanted to run away too. And this policeman was aiming his gun at Hector again, wanting to finish him off. And this girl stood in front of Hector and told the policeman in Afrikaans that skit for me, shoot for me. And the policeman deviated his aim and shot in the air. And then we took that Hector and gave him to some boys and they took him to the car, which appeared in those pics in the UBJ bulletin.
Hector Peterson was 13 years old. Hundreds of blacks were swiftly arrested, including Mrs. Oshadi Pakati, mother of 4 and national president of South Africa's YWCA.
There was so much noise the whole night, and we could hear that there was noise in the police station too. Everybody was kept moving. But
what sort of noise? What?
You know, the kind of noise that sort of displayed an atmosphere of jubilation, you know, a Christmas Eve or a New Year's Eve.
But by daybreak, there was no cause for jubilation. The streets and the mortuaries were strewn with dead. Most of them were children.
This is how it was reported last week by John Fielding of the This Week team for British television. The South African Prime Minister John Vorster still says, after hundreds have died in the past 3 months, there is no crisis. But this was the reaction of the world's press in June. Africa, crisis in black and white. Soweto, all the years of black anger explode. The burning face of Africa. The powder keg has grown, has been refused. Now it is lit. Tomorrow, the whole of Africa could be burning. From Soweto, just outside Johannesburg, the violence has spread to many other areas. The Minister of Justice, James Kruger, has given this warning.
Agitators who do not cease their activities immediately will be prevented from continuing with it by being placed in detention in terms of the Internal Security Acts. Strong police units will be on hand to deal with any person who may try to cause a disturbance on Tuesday or on any other day. These units will have instructions to protect law-abiding citizens and property at all costs, and to do so with all the means at their disposal.
Why has there been such a reaction to what seemed to be a purely educational decision about the use of Afrikaans in schools? The government blames agitators, who they say stir up trouble among the non-white people, most of whom just want to live their lives in peace. Meetings are often prohibited.
This gathering is prohibited by the minister. You are now ordered to disperse, and you must depart from this place of gathering immediately.
The government blames foreign influence and interference, especially from black African states, the frontline states, Angola, Botswana, Zambia, Mozambique, and Tanzania. Above all, the South African government blames the influence of communism in Southern Africa. They claim the communists are inspired by the Soviet Union, that they interfere with black leaders and agitators and plot to overthrow white South Africa. As John Fielding put it to Tsetse, the student leader.
It's more than likely, Tsetse, that you're being described up and down the country at the moment as a communist.
There is no truth in that as far as I'm concerned. It is just that in South Africa, if you're not doing what the government expects you to do, then you are a communist, of course.
Many countries are quick to blame others for their problems, but the South African government seems very defensive, especially in the area of racial policy. As Mr. Vorster said 2 years ago.
Ladies and gentlemen, this government, this nationalist party has been governing South Africa for 26 years under very difficult circumstances in the face of a hostile world. And I say to you, apart from anything...
Why does the government think and act as it does? The racial policy of the South African government is called Apartheid. It means separate development and is an Afrikaans word. Those who support this policy say that separate development is the best way to preserve the traditions and cultures of each of the ethnic groups in South Africa. This is how Dr. Verwoerd, when Prime Minister, justified apartheid on moral grounds in 1960.
While the white man, as in the past, will remain the ruler of the white South Africa as it develops out of this union of ours, he, as the guardian of the black man, will see to it that his development does take place in such a fashion that the black masses, as they become free, do really become free. We will not force independence from outside and from above. We will build up their democratic freedom from the bottom upwards, so that as free will be right for it.
Some changes have been made to apartheid this year by the government. The changes include allowing multiracial sport, so the New Zealand rugby team agreed to come and play in South Africa in June. The government felt that changes like this would meet the demands of blacks and coloureds, but they've had a mixed reception. In April, a leading opposition politician, Helen Suzman, said about the changes.
Well, some of them are important and some of them really are just cosmetic. I would say that the petty apartheid notices, the removal of those, may mean something to some of the population, but in the main, the major changes have been through economic forces rather than through anything else, and also, I might say, through international pressure, such as in the sports policy. The economic forces come from inside. In other words, there are just not enough skilled whites to do the jobs that are reserved to them, or the government would like to reserve for whites only. So many of these jobs have slipped into the hands of black workers. And today in South Africa, as you walk around, you'll find black people doing jobs that they did not do only a few years ago. So that's an important change, but it doesn't stem directly from Mr. Forster's give us a year and you'll see great changes.
Mrs. Suzman is an opposition leader. Can we rely on her views? People's basic attitudes are not easily altered. Listen to another reaction to changes in the apartheid laws.
Are you honestly sorry that these changes have occurred?
No, I'm not sorry. I like to see them come up, but at the same time, can I say that I would rather see it coming up with some education, but they've got no education, and it'll take them a couple of 100 years. They've only just come down from the trees.
The government's view on apartheid is more easily accepted by many whites for two reasons. The first reason is the way apartheid works. Watch these scenes. What do you notice? Yes, apartheid in practice means that while blacks are often in white areas as workers, whites are seldom in black areas, except as police and officials. How can you understand people with whom you have no contact in their own surroundings? Secondly, the government's view on apartheid is accepted by many whites because of the information they're allowed to receive. The government controls radio and television and makes sure that its views are heard more powerfully than those of anyone else. As a South African broadcaster has said, with propaganda, you never let up. It was the determination of Afrikaners to control education more completely that sparked off the Soweto riots. But why should children become involved in a political protest? And why now? Listen to the views of one of the new adult leaders in Soweto, Dr. Manas Buthelezi.
There's a basic difference between this younger generation and the generation of their parents, in that these students are the products of Bantu education. Most of us were raised in an educational system which, even though it had its own shortcomings, but took as a presupposition a common South African society. So you were educated in order to fit in this common society. But these students have been raised in the framework of Bantu education, where they have been told that they are being educated for a place in their own community, a place which is politically circumscribed through the policy of separate development.
As John Fielding has reported,
the children exposed to sham. The integrated society of which their parents dreamed had disappeared. Under separate development, whites educated their children properly and for nothing. Blacks paid for their children's apprenticeship in servitude.
Bantu education, separate education for blacks, was set in motion by Dr. Fafort when Minister of Native Affairs. In 1954, he made the following statement. When I have control over native education, I will reform it so that the natives will be taught from childhood that equality with Europeans is not for them. As a black teacher explains,
it is difficult to imagine, to gauge the depth of feeling. You've got to be black and to live among these kids to realize just how much they hate the imposition of this system called Bantu education. Many of them can quote the words used by Dr. Verwoerd in that fateful debate when he said that there is no reason to educate the black child to the same extent as the white. There is no need to teach a Bantu child mathematics or anything like that when he will never need to use that science of mathematics in his situation.
Right, Kavantan.
Actually, Verwoerd said that all you need to teach the black child is the ability to understand the white master.
But in this government book, published in 1974, widely distributed outside South Africa, describing the education system, it says, the education of Bantu has increasingly been geared to the personal, social, and economic needs of the Bantu-speaking peoples, both in their homelands and in South Africa as a whole. Photographs show what is being done. The caption for this photograph says, they have a bright future, whether educated in their own homeland or in South Africa. But listen to the teacher again and watch.
Bantu education prepares the black child for a subsequent role in society.
You make your water soaking, and then we can steep the cottons. Because cotton is stronger when wet than when dry. So we can rub it in the hands. Now, just show me how to rub this. Show me. Show us the rubbing. Let's get those three to come and do this rubbing here.
They give us Bantu education so that they can justify their racial discrimination against blacks. It teaches that we can never do things like they do, because at all times the black man must remain subservient to a white man. That the black man must never be able, to compete with the white man in job situations.
And Forest Hill.
Johannesburg's labor exchange for blacks. In South Africa, most white officials are Afrikaners, and it was their language that became the focal point of protest against Bantu education.
Okkie is diep in gedagte terwyl hy hankend aanstaap skool toe. Hy stap alleen omdat hy nog niemand by die nuwe skool ken. Hy is 'n nuwe.
At secondary school, Bantu education decrees that subjects must be taught in English and Afrikaans as well as the mother tongue. Frequently, the rules were broken because of difficulties in finding blacks who would teach their subject in Afrikaans.
Because the children have this negative attitude towards Afrikaans. The Afrikaans teacher in the classroom is going to try and force these kids to study Afrikaans. So at all times, Afrikaans is associated with force and very, very harsh people.
Kom nie, dit beteken verstaan. Hy moet nou weer van voor af maats maak. Hy het 'n gawe klompie vriende gehad op Keerwerder, maar nou het sy pa besluit dat hy vir sy hoërskooljare in die koshuis op Verenwil moet kom bly.
What will be the result of all this? Will the government change its policies? How will the non-white people react? Listen again to the report on British television last week.
Massacre at the hands of the police is nothing new to black South Africans. At Sharpeville in 1960, police shot dead 69 blacks who were demonstrating against the pass laws that regulate their existence. 178 others were wounded.
After Sharpeville, well, there was a lot of some kind of feeling just because death had taken place. But to me, as compared to now, not a wide awakening of determination, you know, to fight through like we feel now.
What is needed is not just a readjustment in the details of the policy, but a change of policy altogether. I think that's what is needed. In other words, separate development is not a solution, it is a problem.
The system has done so many things and so much harm to my people that the people are no longer interested in having equal rights with the white people in South Africa. They want the tables to be turned so that the white man can get a taste of his own medicine and feel what it was like to be oppressed.
Okay, I'm gonna start with a brief moment of silence to honor those who lost their lives in that massacre. My name is Dwayne Wang Homwali, and I will be doing a brief presentation on giving a legal analysis of the apartheid system in South Africa and how that system has been able to remain intact nearly 30 years after it legally was supposed to have ended. Give me a moment here. Okay. So as a result of the previous apartheid system in South Africa, approximately 13% of the population controls 87% of the country's land and minerals. Today, despite the innovative land reform programs which the current government has implemented, there's really only been limited success in terms of redistributing the land. Moreover, unemployment in the country of about 56 million people is still more than 25%, and that's been the case for several years now. A report from the Southern African Labor Development Research Unit wrote in 2018 that we find virtually no whites living below the middle class. The same report continues to note that whites have, in fact, comfortably improved their economic status in post-apartheid South Africa because our economy channels such a big share of national income to the top 10%. So we find that even though the apartheid system had formally ended, there's still a great deal of inequality in South Africa, particularly racial inequality. Now, according to a 2017 land audit by the South African government, 72% of the country's arable land remains in the hands of whites, who account for less than 10% of the total population in South Africa. Since the ruling African National Congress came to power in 1994, under the leadership of Nelson Mandela, one of its central undertakings has been to relieve this disparity, but to date, the government's land restitution efforts have barely seen a quarter of such arable land restored to Black farmers. Now, the United Nations Declaration of Rights of the Indigenous People state in its preamble that concerned that Indigenous peoples have suffered from historical injustices as a result of their colonization and dispossession of their lands, territories, and resources, thus preventing them from exercising, in particular, their rights of development in accordance with their own needs and interests. That same declaration continues to state at Article 26 that Indigenous peoples have the right to lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, or otherwise used or acquired. Indigenous people have the right to own, use, develop, and control the lands, territories, and resources that they possess by reason of traditional ownership of their traditionally occupied or used land, as well as those which they have otherwise acquired. Article 28 states that indigenous people have the right to redress by means which can include restitution, or when this is not possible, just, fair, and equitable compensation for the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned or otherwise occupied or used, and which have been confiscated, taken, or occupied. Now, what's interesting is that the Constitution of South Africa also recognizes these rights as well. Article 25, Section 4 states that for the purpose of this section, the public interest includes the nation's commitment to land reform and to reform to bring about equitable access to all South Africa's natural resources, and property is not limited to land. Now, this is written in South Africa's constitution, but in practice, as I pointed out before, this has not been implemented. And what we have in South Africa is a situation where the same apartheid system is in place, although legally the system was dismantled several decades ago. And in closing, I'll give some examples of other nations which have struggled with this issue of indigenous land ownership and how those countries dealt with these issues. The first of which is China. China dealt with a situation where a Chinese territory known as Macau was occupied by the Portuguese in 1549. The colonial power settled its inhabitants in China and claimed this territory as its own. But the People's Republic of China rejected the Portuguese claim to this land. It claimed that Macau was Chinese territory according to international law. And Macau was actually restored to China on December 20th, 1999. China then demanded the same thing for Hong Kong, which Britain had claimed as its territory since 1842. And this territory was restored to China in 1997. Now, the second example actually also comes from the African continent, and this involved the case of the Portuguese colonization and occupation of lands, particularly in Guinea-Bissau and the Cape Verde Island, as well as Angola and Mozambique, which were all former Portuguese colonies. Now, African liberation movements emerged within these occupied territories, struggling against Portuguese occupation and colonialism. And as a result of these different liberation movements and armed struggles, Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde regained their independence on 1975. Angola became independent also in 1975. And Mozambique also became independent in 1975, as I said, as a result of these armed struggles. And the third example comes from India. Now, there's a situation in India where Portugal had also claimed certain territories, and the government of India had ordered that its troops reclaim and seize these territories from Portugal in 1961. Portugal had settled in Indian territories and had been in that region for over 400 years by conquest. And it had asked the United Nations Secretary Council to act against the aggression of India and to order India to withdraw from the territories. The ambassador of India had stated that that this is a colonial question in the sense that the part of our country is illegally occupied by right of conquest by the Portuguese, and that the fact that the Portuguese had occupied the territory for more than 400 years was of no consequence, basically saying that it didn't matter how long the Portuguese had been there. The fact that they had come there and acquired these lands by conquest made what they were doing illegal, and therefore the lands rightfully had belonged to the people of India. So the long settlement of European invaders in South Africa by force of arms has not passed any right to these European invaders to own the African land, particularly at the expense of its rightful owners. And it does not matter how long the Europeans had settled there, as I pointed out with the example of India. The continued domination of white ownership of the resources and land is therefore not justifiable under any law, and Black South Africans have a collective right as indigenous people to the ownership of their lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne, for going into the issue of decolonization. So right now we have a very distinguished panel who is going to give us a firsthand perspective of the issues going on in South Africa, both in the past, in the present, and what do we look forward to in the future. So I'm actually going to unmute our speakers, and if you could please introduce yourself, let us know your connection to particularly what happened at Soweto, but also to the current freedom struggle going on for African liberation. I'm going to just go in the line of which I see. So we're going to start with Sister Thapelo. I'm sorry, Brother Thapelo.
That's correct. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Dumelan, Sanibonani, Absheni, Guten Tag, and in the greetings of one of the proclaimed underground leaders of the 1976 Soweto Uprising, Zafania Mutupeng, I say, Izwele to Africa. My name is Thapelo Mulwantwa. I am a student in digital marketing. I'm doing a master's at the University of Roehampton in London. I'm South African, and I'm very honored to be on this panel today. I am also an ambassador of the Black, Asian, and Minority Group Society at the University of Roehampton. I serve in the Information and Publicity Secretariat of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, which I'm sure that most of you would know about. I mean, obviously South Africans would know, but those in the diaspora I'm referring to. And currently I also serve as the UK and EU mission head for the Pan-Africanist Congress, through which we are uncovering the movement that have been stored in universities and other institutions in the UK and Europe. I'm very honored to be on this panel with these distinguished leaders of the 1976 uprising, some of whom I heard from my grandfather, who was a teacher, a deputy headmaster at Orlando High, Papa Tsileng, and from my mother, who is a friend to Mrs. Mkabela, who's the wife to one of the panelists. So I thank you for the introduction.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Thank you. And we'll go now to Sister Thorolo.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi. Well, I don't have much to say in terms of my introduction, but I am Tarolo Siatlolo. I studied international relations and I'm studying philosophy now, specifically African philosophy, and I run the Khotso Siatlolo Foundation. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Now I'm going to unmute Baba Seth. Baba Seth, if you could unmute, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Just as a Khotso Siatlolo's daughter, I'm a humble Seth Mazibuko, and who was humbled and honored by the students of 1976 leadership to be the deputy chairperson of the action committee that planned and led 1976. And I happened to then have gone at the age of about 15 into leadership roles as leading the students in 1976. And thereafter being, in the Soweto 11 trial. And then after the trial, we were sentenced. We were 4 of us out of the 11. Thabo was one of them, and then that got prison sentence. And Sbongile, the wife to Ishmael. And yes, at the moment, I'm working with young people in Soweto, in the township where it all happened. and still working with them in a foundation called June 16 Foundation, Development Foundation. In the Development Foundation, we have three main components of the four main components of the foundation. That's the youth development, and there's the education trust, what we call June 16 Education Trust. And then we've got the third one, which is the June 16 Economic Development, Economic Enterprise. And the economic enterprise is like a big brother or big sister supporting the youth in the Youth Foundation and in the trust and the Development Foundation. At the moment, we are more focusing our work on four main pillars. One, it is history and heritage. We are compiling the history and heritage of 1976. This year, we just declared this year as the year of untold stories of 1976, and also the unsung heroes and heroines of 1976. We've partnered with University of Johannesburg to unravel that, which we are going to launch in the 50th anniversary of June 16. Furthermore, I work with the young people in what we call June 16 Brigade. These are the youth who are going out there who are saying the history of African people must be preserved, protected, and promoted by the African people themselves. And we then have the second pillar of our work, which is social justice and human rights. And that which then we work with communities. The last work we did, it was the forced removal by the current government of people on a land issue in an area called, in some of where people moved in forcibly because they don't have place to stay. So we're working there with the June 16 Brigade. The third pillar is the pillar on youth citizenry and youth activism, where we're saying to young people, move on and get involved on citizen issues. And then the last pillar is education and education support. That is where we focus more on, we work closely with the Fees Must Fall movement on issues of decolonization of curriculum and on Fees Must Fall issues. And yeah, those are our four pillars where we're doing work as the June 16 Development Foundation. And having said that, we are busy at the moment with issues of GBV, gender-based violence, but our focus is more on children. We take this from the history that says in 1976, more of people were violated when there were shootings were children. We work with Mandela Children's Fund, the South African Human Rights Commission, and the REPSI, which is the psychosocial support of children program, to try, and we're working with schools in and around Soweto to try and support schools on psychosocial support of children and on gender-based violence. Lastly, this morning, we have been able, we are the ones, I'm happy that the daughter of Soweto Uprising is here. We erected the tombstone of Soweto Uprising, and with Tsietsi Mashinini, we put them together and erected that tombstone. We visited that tombstone today. Joe was just talking about it earlier. We had a virtual walk with the June 16 Brigade, where we remembered all those who were who led and those who were killed. So we took young people to the tombstone of to the grave of Tsietsi Mashinini and Soweto Uprising, and then we took them to Hector Peterson's grave, and after that took them out to where the confrontation was in 1976 in the corner of Mwema and Vilakazi Street. Then we walked up to Hector Peterson, and then we walked up to what was called Bele Primary, which is now called Mbuyisa Makubu, a school, to also remember Mbuisa Makubu. Mbuisa Makubu is the one young man who's holding, he spoke about him when he was actually in the documentation. He's the one that is holding Hector Peterson when they were putting Hector Peterson into the Volkswagen that took Hector to the graveside. And then after that, we visited also the Mama Sophie Dima, who was the journalist that wrote most of the articles in 1976, who was also using that Volkswagen that supported Hector. That's my humble but long background. Yes, I'm staying in Soweto in Orlando East.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to unmute Baba Ishmael.
Thanks very much, dear sister. I will not speak that long. I have been part of people who were born in Soweto. I was born there. And my first experience was actually being part of an informal or squatter community in Orlando East, which was established by one of the pioneers of Soweto, Mr. Mbanza. I have actually gone since Soweto developed. And how did I end up where I am today? I think in summary is that I was educated within Soweto under Bantu education. I have known any other system. Bantu education was a system. We were segregated on tribal lines as well. That you find that was also encouraging that we don't mix. If you say you were born within Nguni speaking, you may not meet with the Sotho speaking people. I also found my way developing my consciousness within really religious circles, a Christian background, that you had to confront the reality that if indeed you accept the faith, it doesn't distinguish whether you are black or white, all people are people. And so that to me was very important, but we also became a generation of those people who had to be aware. What have I done, or what has actually been my career? I worked with the South African Council of Churches. We're resisting forced removals of people from tribal land. I worked on that and I came to learn a number of things. Important among the things I learned is that good leadership does actually make a difference in the people's lives. I also pioneered what we call broad-based community organizing, where you build communities and leadership by picking up issues which are of immediate concern to people. I also, after the banning of the Black Consciousness Organization in 1977, I was asked to lead. I made my contribution. We ultimately formed the Tanzanian People's Organization. But if I'm to stop so that others may also have their say, what is it that defines me? I actually believe that I gave my life, or my life was taken by causes which defined the struggles of our people within the Black consciousness movement, and also learned how to work with different constituents of the Black community to improve their lots. I'm a community organizer, a professional community organizer. I understand how to work in communities, be they informal settlements and their struggles. I understand them. I was part of those who negotiated with the old system, the housing policy. I was deputy chairperson of the National Housing Forum, which agreed on a housing policy for South Africa post-apartheid, and I also served as the National Housing Board chairperson, which was advising the ministers of housing. I think that's all I can say, and other things I would say as we continue with the conversation. I'm Ishmael Mkabe.
Thank you so much, Baba Ishmael. I'm not sure if our other two speakers are in the chat or if they're under a different name, but Advocate Gandhi and also Brother Upa, if you are here, could you please message me and I can unmute you?
Yes.
Oh, okay, here we go.
That's Advocate Badela. I'm sorry, I am using a device with the name of my clan name. So that's why you were unable to recognize me.
Thank you, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for organizing this session. In actual fact, I'm pleased that we have the people we have gathered today. You've heard what I may call something from those who were leaders during the June 76, but now you are going to hear from the ordinary person, the ordinary child, the ordinary teenager, the ordinary youth during those days. I am born and bred in Soweto, like everybody else. Prior to that, I had known no other place except that. I, like any other youth from Soweto or any township in the country, had experienced racism, apartheid, denigration, violation of our dignity, like anyone else, and have felt how difficult it was to be born and be boxed as if you are an unintelligent being or thing. However, there was a hollow in terms of leadership after the arrest in the 60s and of our leaders, and also the fact that many people had to go underground and very few people were willing to stand up and say their say. However, I think as the generation of June 16, we were lucky in the sense that in the 60s and the late 60s, in particular 70s, we had people who were very brave, who stood up, and who, when we heard what they say, were encouraged and felt that we had to participate in what was taking place at the time. I personally believe that I was politicized in the main by Black consciousness. As I was a youth at the time, I became aware, and my mind was also sharpened by the things that we did in terms of exchanging literature, in particular, reading more about a number of things. And I think also I was lucky in terms of being able to be in the space where there were quite a lot of activists. I recall very vividly a publication that was done by a publishing house called Raven Press. Me to sharpen my mind and to understand what was going on around me. As one may well be aware that it was difficult for parents at the time to even talk about politics because it was regarded as something dangerous. You know, the system was such that you could not trust the next person or even family members because you never knew what would happen with what you say. However, on the days leading, I would say, to June 16, I can say and confirm as a person who was there that there were some discussions, there were some rumors, there were some indications of something that was to happen, but no one knew exactly what was to happen. I, at the time, happened to be in a secondary school, and they will know Seth and Ish, and will know the school, and Tabo will know the school, Daluonga Secondary School, and Dube. When the movement started all the way from Naledi, passing through Morris Isaacson, passing along my Daluni teenage youth at the time joined in the movement. And I can attest that there were quite a number of students who were marching peacefully during that day, and no one knew what was to happen. But all we knew, we were moving towards Orlando West, and with us having our grievances against the Africans, as you all know. I think I won't repeat the issue of the Africans, and it is true that the government at the time tried. I remember, for example, they tried to teach us mathematics in Afrikaans in our school. And that's where also we started protesting, because there was just no way that we had wanted to change from English to Afrikaans. And it found resistance among students at the time. As I say, personally, I was an ordinary student, ordinary youth. I was not, and I did not participate at leadership level, but I was conscious of what was happening, and I was an active participant, knowing exactly how I feel and how I felt at the time. Obviously, like again, I think there's nothing uncommon with my behavior, in the sense that after June 76, we continued with our protest in various forms. From my side, for example, what we then decided after 76, I went to Orlando High School for a year. After that, with a group of students, we decided that we are not going to do Bantu education anymore. But the problem was going back to our parents, telling them that we are no longer going to go to school, because we had to have an alternative. Fortunately, at the time, there was an institution called Tarrant College, which then started in 1977, doing some kind of write-ups for students to catch up, and they would publish these in the world, and we would read and buy specifically the newspaper so that we can learn our subjects and be able to write. We decided to join Tarrant College, and when we come there, I think I know there's quite a Opa Ngwenya. Opa will also tell you he was part of that group. In Tarrant, we then obviously did O levels instead of doing the normal matric certificate. Unfortunately, after I completed my O levels, and again, as I said, as a result of my participation, I ended up in exile. I left the country in 1981, and I spent my time in Botswana, Zambia, Tanzania, and I also went to study in Russia. On my return, obviously, I came back to Tanzania, and then also served the movement I was part of at the time, the ANC. And I then also again left and went to Britain, where I spent some time, I think 3 years or 4 years or so, can't recall now. Thereafter, I returned home after, I think, 13 or 14 years of being outside the country. On return, I vowed not to go back to politics. And I know that it was not a good decision, but I had learned a lot being in exile. I had seen the characters of people. I had understood what it means to be loyal to one's country. And I also understood the patronage that sometimes happened. And because of that, I decided that I am going to serve my country in a different form. And I have done that, and I'm pleased that I still do the same as even today. I worked for some companies, and then I decided at some point that I wanted to be a lawyer. I decided to study and reinvent myself. I am now a member of the Johannesburg Society of Advocates, and I've been so for a number of years. I practice in a general form, but I participate in what I call activities that are aimed at transforming our society in a number of ways. As an advocate, I play a role in the leadership of the Johannesburg Society of Advocates. I also play a role nationally as part of the regulator of all the legal practitioners in the country. We have just finished some work that involves the legal sector codes with the aim of transforming the briefing patterns, the patterns of legal practitioners getting work, be it from government or private sector. That I believe is going to be a contribution towards the transformation of how we develop as advocates or as lawyers, and how we gain our experience, and more importantly, as how we derive our livelihood. As I said, I was there. I can attest to what happened, but I won't say much because this was more of an introduction about myself, and I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I'm not sure if Brother Upa is here. If you are, please let me know and I will unmute you. And if not, we can start with the first question. I'm looking through one more time to make sure I don't see any. Yes, I don't see any names. So we can start with the first question for our panelists. I think for me personally, the most shocking aspect of Soweto is that this uprising was children. And it's just shocking to think that young children could be motivated to go against a state that has proven itself violent. So I would ask, and if this is something that you have an opinion on, if not, you can chime in on questions that pertain to your experience. But I would ask, particularly for those there, what about the issue of language drove children to willingly go against a violent state and possibly risk their lives?
Kenny, you left me out.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry. Your brother Upa?
Tabo.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Please introduce yourselves.
Okay. My name is Tabo Ndabeni, also grew up in Soweto. Said Mazbugo Bongim Kabela. I was part of them. I was a student in 1976. I was a student at Musi High School in Pimville. 77 were detained with the senior executive of the SSRC. We were then charged with said Bongi. We became known as the Soweto 11. I got 5 years. I got convicted of sedition, but got a 5-year suspended for 5 years in 1979. I then was active within Azapo. I served under Ish as my president. Then was elected national organizer at Azapo again. When Tarulo's father came back into the country in 1981 and was detained, I was also detained with him. When he was put on trial, the system wanted me to testify because of they knew of my interactions with him when he was in exile. I refused to testify and then was sentenced to 18 months in prison. I came back in 1980, I think 1983, continued as national organizer for Azapo. I have served in different capacities as national director for an organization that Ish's wife established with Advice Centers Association. I also served as national director for the Independent Mediation Services of South Africa. As I am an expert mediator, during the conflict between the political parties in the country, I served as a local mediator in the East Rand, sort of separating the people that were fighting between the ANC and the IFP. I'm a social activist and still a strong adherent of Black consciousness.
Thank you so much. Oh, my apologies.
Thank you. No, that's fine.
Thank you, Baba Thobo. I'm sorry again. Should I repeat the question? The question for our panelists is, what drove children, everyday children, to engage inside of a violent freedom struggle? And what about the issue of language? What about that issue is what would drive them to that? I see that Advocate Badella is raising his hand, so I will unmute him.
No, so thank you very much for that question. I think maybe I'll just say a few words. I think it was not just about the language, the way I read it personally, but that the language became the last straw. There was anger among people because of what was happening. And people were not feeling so much boxed in or oppressed in many ways, in the sense that, as you saw in the video, for example, where now even the little that was there in the form of education was being taken away slowly, and we were being domesticated, and people were taught, or the system merely wanted people to be hewers of water, as they say. And that anger, in actual fact, was boiling. But when then the issue of the language came in, it was a last straw, and it's something that lit the fuse, so to say. As you will recall, what we as young people have experienced, there was the system tried to do a leadership gap by banning and imprisoning leaders. During that time, you have young people like Steve Biko coming up, and they themselves also faced the same situation. And the people generally had nothing else and nothing to lose. And at that time, I recall that I personally was very angry about the issue of being forced to be taught in a language that I despised, in a language that I felt it was the language of the oppressor. So I think as a starting point, it was not just about the language, but the language was that lighting of the fuse that lit the streets of all the towns, including.
Okay, thank you very much.
May I also take up a point there to say that I think it is very important that we should bring this question down to the level of the people in the streets of Soweto. When the whole conceptualization of by big politicians of introducing Bantu education started, and that even of introducing the language to further oppress African people. Us, as the students of 1976, we were not the first to say this is wrong, and even say this Bantu education is wrong. The Bishop Tutus of the time and all the other Black leaders had actually stood against the introduction of Bantu education well in the 50s. And it should also be mentioned that part of the bannings, when many of the Black-led organizations were banned in the 60s, it was also to suppress Black leadership and Black thoughts and Black inspirations. And when we came to even the Sharpeville shooting, and Sharpeville was the 21st of March, 1960. It is part of that resistance of refusing to be dominated by a system, and that coming from the simple people. And it is that which, after that political lull, after the 60s, and after the lull of Black political activism, because many organizations and many liberation movements had gone underground and Black leaders were taken into prison or were banned. It was that time when the resurrection and the invent of Black consciousness became stronger. The Steve Bigos came in. And I was involved in a discussion with Thabo and Sibongile Mkhabela just the other day on the same issue, that it was in the 70s when Black consciousness came up, that Black consciousness did not just speak about high politics. Black consciousness went down to the ground and worked with the people. It was that time when establishment of structures such as the Black community programs started. Black people started their own clinics, such as Zanempilo Clinic, helping, which was a health clinic. Started Empilweni Mobile Clinic, started alternative education programs. And this was down at the level of people. There was nothing that was high flow. That, I think, is the biggest score of Black consciousness in sitting in the minds of Black people. It did not just speak politics. It actually went down to say, Black man, you are on your own. And it was that Black man, you are on your own, that actually then produced programs that were actually making a Black man to be on his own. And Fanyana Mazibuko, Thabo Mbeki gave, I'm sorry, Thabo, did I call you Thabo Mbeki? I wanted to say Thabo Ndabeni. I'm sorry about that, Thabo. And spoke of some of the teachers that came out of that system, that then said, we are going to be a different brand of teachers, not teachers of apartheid, but also teachers of the liberation movement. We also had Christians. Ish spoke about his leadership from the Christian movement. He was my leader in what was called, and the current president of the country, in what was called Young Ambassadors. And it is out of that leadership that then us as young people, I was only 15 then, I was only, I turned 16 on the 15th of June. And it was from that background of being of Black consciousness, being not just an organization out there or a movement out there, but being grounded and also project-based. And I think that should come up strongly, that it is out of community-based programs that encourages and self-sustained people that Black consciousness had to sit in our minds, and that which made us to stand up against the bullets whilst we're holding books.
Thank you. Do we have any other thoughts on that question, or should we move to the next one? I'll give it a minute. Go ahead, brother with the pillow.
I personally wasn't there, obviously, and but I am the generation that came after some of the leaders who were there, who are with us today. But generally speaking, I, as the advocate said, I think the language matter must have been a symptom of a bigger situation in which you, as a youth, realize, for instance, that a neighboring country such as Mozambique had gained independence, therefore bringing forth the reality that it is possible to live in a free world. You did not have to refer to a far-flung area to realize that the liberation struggle was worth fighting for, via the example of the fight of Frelimo in Mozambique. And I think that must have somehow had an indirect influence in the minds of the Black consciousness movement. And as Mzwakhe Mbuli says, one cannot put a lid over the top of a hot boiling pot forever. So the boiling had already begun many years prior to 76, to Sharpeville, Langa. And my assessment is that it was a boiling point, a symptom of a greater situation. Just to give a practical perspective to that, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, my grandfather was a deputy head at Orlando High, teaching along with Zafania Mutupeng, and he was also a leader in the Johannesburg Student Sports Society, if I mentioned the name correct. And at some point, a British football legend came to provide football clinics in Soweto, through which they then were given an offer to travel to Brazil as a team. And in that respect, they formed a team called the Stan's Men. Now, here's a group of young men who have this fantastic opportunity to go and play football and meet Pelé, Zico, and those football legends in Brazil, but the government refused them permission. For me, that is an incident in which you as a young man will be angry as well, to say, Coca-Cola has offered to pay for our trip and everything, and here's a government that is refusing for us to leave the country. Eventually, they did leave after meetings were called at the hall, I think it is DOCC. So I just wanted to bring about a practical example to what could have led, besides the language as Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Capello. And you brought up a point that is perfect for my next question. As you said, it became clear that there was another South Africa that was possible for the people who were participating. I would ask one of the panelists, what was the vision of the protesters? And could you relate it to the current struggle to decolonization of South Africa, particularly South Africa being what we would describe as a settler colonial state, one in which the power structure is actively present and living and occupies much of the land, and much of the people who are indigenous to the region are without access to that resource. Anyone could jump in.
I don't like a vacuum, but I think either Thabo or Seth should, because as I said, as leaders at the time, they must have had some ideas, but I think it would be better.
I thought I should actually give Thabo, as part of the leadership of the time, to speak on that, then I will add.
Thanks, Seth. The whole idea, maybe I should latch on first to the original question. It must be noted, we're not separate from the community or separate from Black people in the country. So the challenges that our parents had, eking a living from day to day, struggling to get us closed, struggling to keep us a roof under our head, being called children by small kids, white small kids, and so on. Those things affected us as children of those parents. So the use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, or the enforcement of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, was seen by us as an extension of our oppression. Our vision, therefore, going forward was to transform society, to decolonize the country, reclaim the land, remove the illegal occupants of power, remove them from office so that you are able to run our country all together. Thus, if you see the transformation of the program of the SSRC as it moves down the months, what became very, very political. So our vision was for the transformation of society, more than just to remove Africans as a medium of instruction or just a struggle against the enforcement, the Bantu education as a system. We're against the entire illegitimate government that was in place on the day. I rest there.
Thank you. Any follow-up commentary?
Yeah, I think I want to follow up a little bit on my side, and this is just a personal view, but it is guided by what was happening at the time. For me, because of the manner of oppression, and because of the manner in which the government wanted to ensure that we don't grow beyond what it wanted us to be, there was, for example, among students, and I think anyone who was a student at the time would attest to this, we had some kind of groupings among students who would help each other. The issue of self-reliance, the issue of development, the aspirations were quite strong amongst us. But more important also, you will recall that during that time, the countries began to become independent. Quite a number of countries became independent. And also that was a driving force because we were now exchanging ideas about what we wanted, how we wanted to be, but at the same time, we were learning about what others had done. So there was a desire to be free, but also there was an acknowledgement that education is important. I agree, for example, with Seth when he says that we were protesting, we were struggling with the book in hand. And that is true because whenever an opportunity came for us to educate ourselves in one way or the other, be it in a classroom or outside the classroom, we did that. And if one looks back at the generation of June 16, generally, if you take it as a decade, you will see that a number of those people, in spite of what the apartheid wanted us to do and be, we achieved quite a great deal because of the determination, because of the consciousness that came in. As I alluded also for me, at the time, I was heavily driven and influenced by Black consciousness, the ideal of self-reliance, the ideal of cooperation, working together. And I think that for me, and the fact that we had these small groups of students who were working together, for example, the issue of exchange of banned literature. How did that happen? It happened within cells, within groups of students, and they would argue and discuss ideas about what we have read. And one would say, oh, I've got that book, by Du Bois. And then one would, the book will really do rounds, but it will do rounds in secrecy, because if one were to be caught with that, we all knew what would happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe I would like to pick up just a minor point here, just for us to, come to understand that, the struggle of the 70s and in that tender age of that generation was a struggle that was yearning for quality, and the struggle that was also saying we cannot live in these conditions with our parents being intimidated by, I think one of the speakers earlier on, I think it was the Advocate, that said our parents would not even want us to mention any of the names of the people like Mutuping, like Sobukwe, and like Mandela, because when you mention those names, you'll be immediately taken into prison. So when Black consciousness came to free us from that mindset, it is when we started wanting to become loud and wanting to define the future of our education system and all the other systems that exist at the time. I'm trying to say we are in a situation where we are saying Black children, Black parents, themselves at that time were eager. I remember when we arrived on Robben Island, and even the leaders in Robben Island, and I happen to have been honored that when we're driving down to Robben Island in a police van, I was chained with Zephaniah Mtuping. And when we are, and Zephaniah Mtuping that time was going to Robben Island for the second time. And when we arrived on Robben Island, I mean, the whole number of people that were there, including those who were in the BP Sisaso trial, the Frelimo rally, and those who were involved in different trials at that time. There was a hope that 76 had brought liberation. They expected that, tell us guys, when are we getting free? And we had to disappoint them and tell them that there's still a long walk to this freedom. But the point I'm making is that June 16 managed, to bring to surface some of the issues that were boiling all along. And the explosion started, I think Jimmy Kruger and MC Botha was the minister of Bantu education then, still regrets why they even started to introduce the question of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, because it then exploded the whole country.
Thank you so much.
Can I
Yes.
add? Yeah, I just wanted to say there are three points I would like to make on this. One, white oppression survived on intimidation and instilling fear.
Yeah.
Black consciousness gave us the confidence to overcome that fear.
True.
Two, white oppression, as Ish said, was intent on breaking us into small bits and pieces in the country. Black consciousness came with Black solidarity, and we were all united against a single enemy, which was the illegal government of the day. My third point, the students of 76 brought agency to the struggle. Seth went to Ireland, to Robben Island, and those that left, like Advocate, left for exile. Everybody who went, wherever they went with one message. We're coming here with a plan to come back. That's why all the leadership everywhere had difficulty in handling the class of 76, because all of them were simply saying, train me. After training me, I want to go back home. On Robben Island, there was some relationship that the prisoners had sort of developed with the warders there, and the defiant 76 crowd just simply said, there is no way we can coexist with these individuals. So there was this agency that something must happen, and it must happen now because we can't wait any longer. I rest my case.
Thank you. The next question I have is more about the present situation in South Africa. I would ask, in light of the vision that was put forth by the participants in the Soweto Uprising, does the current political environment look like one that will bring about an equitable South Africa, and are we close to realizing a decolonization of the country? I'll actually ask Sister Thorola if you want to start, because we haven't heard from you yet. If you had anything to say, I just wanted to check.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so I'll refer to the decolonization decolonization in South Africa and what we think of it, and also in comparison to other countries. So basically, decolonization in South Africa should look different than other countries because the issues are not the same. The common factor between South Africa and other countries is the persistence of racism and white supremacy. Colonization in South Africa since 1652 entailed conquest in the form of deprivation of sovereign title to territory and epistemicide. Decolonization, therefore, should take the form of restoring sovereign title to territory and cultural self-determination. The restoration of sovereign title to territory to the indigenous people involves the resolution of the national question. Now, the resolution can take three forms. Number one, it can take the form that white settlers are expelled from our land on the basis of Africa for the Africans, like the Garvey movement or Anton Lembede's Africanism. Then secondly, the white settlers, it can take the form that the white settlers remain but are integrated into the culture and the land of the indigenous people. So this is captured by Robert Sebukwe's metaphor in Here's an African Tree, or Steve Biko's Here is a Table. Now, the third and last form would be the transformation option, in which the white settlers retain the land they stole and continue to practice their own racist culture side by side with the indigenous people. This is derived from the Freedom Charter and liberal non-racialism. The Freedom Charter clearly states both Black and white. This is also reiterated in the preamble to the South African Constitution of 1996, which says, "We as the people of South Africa." This for the ANC was a form of decolonization, and it triumphed in 1994. But it is actually democratization rather than decolonization. Democratization basically entails the extension of political and civil rights to the formerly excluded indigenous people, indigenous conquered people, without restoring the sovereign title to territory. This results in just government succession. The democratization took place under the ANC because they are a civil rights movement and not a liberation movement. Decolonization can only take place within a liberation movement that will result in state succession. The current call for decolonization in post-apartheid South Africa is an extension of the transformation in the name of decolonization. We can refer to it as aesthetic or cosmetic decolonization in the form of renaming things, teaching history, including a few Blacks into white-owned institutions. The call that needs to be made for us is one of total destruction of the white settler world and rebuilding of the Azanian civilization on the basis of African culture.
Thank you. It looks like Advocate Badilla, your hand is rose. Is that correct?
Yes, my hand is up. You know, Tini, you've brought up a very painful question. It's painful because, and I'm sure my colleagues will attest to that too. It's painful because when one reflects and thinks about the life that has been given without expecting anything in return, and to see what is now happening, it is hurting. I say so because I think the program you're talking about has not started 25 years later. We are seeking to appease people. We are seeking to patch some relationships. We are seeking to do things that will make the world see us in a certain way. It is painful for me, I'll be honest, and I say this without anything. And I think I should premise this by saying all those, at least in my generation, who participated in one way or the other in the struggle, did so not because they expected anything in return. They did so because of the love of their country. They did so because of their loyalty to our country and to the continent. I remember very vividly the poem of Ingwapele Madingwane, Africa My Beginning, Africa My Ending. That was our war song. That was our struggle song. We knew what we meant when you say Africa My Beginning, Africa My Ending. But what we have seen since we took over is that, as Frantz Fanon said, those who come into power in simple replace the system and the people who were driving a system that benefits the same people. If one has regard, for example, on simple things, you take the program of BE, which was meant to be a transformational program. Who has it benefited? Not the people, a few individuals. And and to make it worse is that they have created a patronage system by legalizing it and by making sure that when they benefit, no one questions it. You are unable to question it because it's legal, it's normal, it's done through the channels of government. Whereas also, if one looks at the main issues that the Black consciousness deals with, the struggle of the mind of an African person. Today, we see the world in the same eyes or lens that was there in the past. Nothing has changed. When I listen to the news today, I still listen through to the news of BBC. I do not have access to what is broadcast in Mozambique. I do not have access to what is broadcast in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, because why? The same isolationist approach is still taking place, even though no one is forcing us to do that. I see personally our government, if one also looks at the simple issues, everybody knows that our land was taken from us by force. Everybody knows that our land was taken through legislation that was passed intentionally to do that. Now, why is it difficult to do the same using the law and the powers that we have today? Again, it is because we are appeasing those who are calling the tune. It is painful because I think when we participated in the liberation of our country, the aim was to have self-determination. The aim was to ensure that our sovereignty is intact and our dignity is intact. As I speak to you today, we are seeing politics that are pitting Africans against Africans. And I think it's intentional because I don't see why can't we put up measures and rules and laws that enable people to engage, to meet, to come and go legally and to do what they want. I don't understand, for example, as I see today, why one would import a hawker from Pakistan to come and trade in the streets and compete with our people who are trying to make a living. I don't understand why, for example, when the time came, we were not given a tax break as people. We were treated as if we had wealth that had been amassed over many years. A government which wants to transform has to look at the environment and the situation we find ourselves in. Why is it that the small coming up, I would say, middle class from the Black society is treated as if it had a wealth that comes from, from many years? I don't understand, for example, why is it that our government does not understand our country and our situation in the sense that I, as a Black person, when I work, I don't work for myself only. I've got an extended family I've got to feed. I've got people I've got to look after, but I'm taxed as if I'm an individual who's got no other responsibility. I also don't understand why our education, for example, is not meant and aimed at empowering people so that they are able to be independent. I denounce a policy which initially and on the surface looks good in the sense you say, I want to create a safety net for people. But then that becomes the solution. What kind of a safety net do you have where government spend more money than it creates? Because I think if one has a social program, you must have a social program that has got a resource that is able to sustain itself, that is able to have a cake that is going to be shared by many people. What we find is something that seems to be intentionally aimed at destabilizing the country. But one also sees that for politicians to be able
my battery is running red, and
okay.
it might
all right.
happen.
You know, yes.
Yeah, and I might have to move out quickly. And
don't you want them to have a say before you go? Then I can step down, and then you can say your say before you go. Let's hear you.
My very last point before I go is just that my leaders, my fellow Black South Africans and international community, the only one problem we have here is that I think Mugabe asked a very good question to our liberation movement. What are you fighting for? What do you want to achieve? I had a conversation with my sister Spongile the other day. Have us as South African defined what we want, what do we want to call a South African? We haven't. We haven't defined an ideal South Africa. There can be policies, there can be frameworks, there can be commissions, there can be anything. We haven't. We have people, we have a country, we have a government that is still not sure as to exactly what is it that want to deliver for our people. All I'm asking, and all what my prayers are, I think the first thing that we've got to do is to disconnect. It is to connect with our people, to connect with the very people who have put us where we are. And to start, we would not be having the Zondo Commission if we're doing right. We would not have the cases in courts today if we're doing right. And we should be asking ourselves, there is something that we're not doing right. We should not be having the Marikana if we're doing right. We should not be having Fees Must Fall, a movement, if we're doing right. We should not be having the Taitane in the Free State if we're doing right. I think there's another CODESA that is needed, the CODESA of the Black people talking about themselves, not about white people. We still have to reconcile with ourselves as Black people. We killed each other. Let's not forget that with the third force. We're still angry. There was IFP, there were all these other. We're still fighting, even in the current situation. We're still fighting against each other as Black people. And that makes me, and I believe wherever Steve Biko is, should be crying that I died for nothing, because we're still fighting against each other as Black people. And let me tell you, we are not fighting against each other to protect our people, but we're fighting against each other to protect our pockets. I rest my case.
Thank you so much, Baba Seth. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would also want to chat in. I don't know how to raise my hand here.
It's okay.
Yeah, so I actually feel that in as much as we're looking at struggle as South African, the fact that we agreed to hook up together today with people from the West is purely because we felt that the struggle which are going on are not necessarily geographically defined. In the diaspora, there are struggles which are being fought. I think George Floyd did demonstrate in a very clear way. Maybe we did not even know how to respond as a unit. both Africans and the diaspora. So I actually also, I'm happy that I look in our list of participants, there's also Reverend Dr. Chikani with us, who is also is now looking at how do we bridge the gap between the Africans and the African diaspora in identifying things which we could tackle together, in as much as sometimes we may look at things which are too big, too general, and we end up maybe escaping dealing with the reality, the immediate, and focus on the idea. But I just felt that I don't know whether some of the people who are in there are listening, you are able to read their messages and or even invite some of them, or they invite themselves through you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Brother Pasatapelo, if you would like to go next.
Yes, just relative to what has already been said, I just wanted to touch on the decolonization as against democratization aspect. You have a situation in which one sector of the liberation movement promoted what was called multiracialism, as opposed to others who, like Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, who started advocating for non-racialism, essentially saying that we are Africans in Africa. And we need to form a singular identity as Africans, through which we can then educate the new or the forthcoming generations about what it means to have African values. Even if your ancestors come from here, from Britain, or Holland, or Germany, but you're African and you're living in Africa. One of the major motivations behind these continued divisions amongst people in Azania is because of a lack of an Azanian identity. If you go to China today, it is a Chinese country managed by Chinese people. You have to learn Mandarin. If you send your child to school, they will learn in Chinese or Mandarin, let me rather say. Whereas in Azania, it happened the other way around. Settler colonialists wanted to import a European value system into Azania and continue to do that today with the permission of our government, in a way. Once a group of young Black kids move from Soweto to a school in the former white areas, what happens is that more often than not, the white parents will pull their children out of that school and send them to what they say is a private school. And this has happened across Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town, everywhere. You find that in a so-called formerly white area, there are no white kids in the schools in that very same community. They are commuting to another school. Our government should put its foot down and say, this is not going to be allowed. How are you going to form an African identity in Africa if you allow practices such as those? Hence, in the last 2 months, even the last 2 weeks, we've seen incidents in various schools in Witbank and in Pretoria, where parents on the Black and the white communities have physically clashed outside schools, following on another incident that happened in Cape Town that resulted in a massive demonstration by the Economic Freedom Front in the Pan-Africanist Congress. So we have to form an Azanian value system that will be inculcated from a young age so that the new generations are socialized into a single identity that is not what we have been educated about the rainbow nation, a system that essentially says that there are different colors and it perpetuates multiracialism. We have to form a singular identity of being an African, no matter what color you are. As Khotso Seakholo's daughters mentioned about Anton Limbede, you know, you could be any color, but you have to identify yourself first as an African. In the UK, where I am right now, in primary schools, they teach British value systems in a specific class for all the kids that are going to public schools. And I believe in private schools as well. So I think that, yes, let's move from democratization to decolonization. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more question, and I do want to ask the audience, if you have any questions, you can please type them in the chat and I will try to ask them. I don't want to belabor the time, but just as a closing question from me, we're a national association of, or the National Council of Black Lawyers. Also, there are other professionals who may be on the line. What do lawyers, professionals, what do we do to further the struggle against these types of systems, colonial systems, apartheid systems, and what should our focus be in light of the sacrifice that has been made for us by so many activists, especially in light of what was done for to the children at Soweto? Anyone want to take that closing question?
For me, I'm curious to know what are your initial thoughts of what you could do to act in solidarity with the struggle of our people, both in this country, Africa, and the diaspora. Do you have any thoughts?
Oh, I can speak to mine as an individual. I think that in the struggle for South Africa, a lot of our ancestors laid a very good framework for us in that so many Africans in America stood against the United States supporting South Africa. So I believe that we have to actively campaign against our governments wherever we are throughout the diaspora, whenever they support white supremacist colonial structures. So that's my opinion as an individual.
May I put up a challenge for you? And I think it's something that it's a challenge for me too. I talk now as a legal practitioner. I'm saying, why is it that we cannot, as legal practitioners, challenge some of the things that we see as unjust, and through our own what we call efforts and understanding where we are acting and what we are doing. I'll tell you one issue that has come up from time to time, but no one seems to be taking the bait. People have spoken about reparations. We've seen what, for example, now has happened in Namibia, where the German government was trying to buy out or buy its face by saying, we will give you this amount of money and you will use this amount of money for this or that or this. Why is it that we cannot take a cause and work as advocates across Africa, across the diaspora, and champion that? For an example also, why is it that when there is an incident that happens to one of us, wherever we may find ourselves in, why is it that we cannot have legal practitioners in that jurisdiction with the support of others challenging such injustices, so that we all know that as an African, wherever you are, you can be protected by those who understand the law and those who understand the processes that apply in a given environment. Because I look, for example, at other nationalities, and I see that you cannot touch someone and not have a response. Even here in South Africa, for example, you can't say anything about one sector of our society without an organization that has been set up to protect the interest of those of that sector coming up and defending their interest. But when it comes to us, I don't see that coming through. So the challenge I would like to put to all of us is that there are many things that are happening around us. Why is it that we can't deal or start dealing with the issues that are around us in a form of self-reliance in various ways? Thank you.
Thank you, and I completely agree. Sister Thorola?
Yeah, so I'd like to come in reference to your question on how we best honor the dreams of the student activists who basically sacrificed their lives. So you asked how we as lawyers and professionals and people, basically, we honor those dreams. So I think the question should rather be like, how do we as Africans, instead of describing ourselves using titles, because there are those without those titles, and do they not have like a duty to realize the dreams and visions of the students of 76? Now, the 76 movement was a mass movement, and after June 16 and the burials of the people who transcended, the movement organized itself and included parents and workers of the students. And they were now not confronting Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, but specifically white settler colonialism. We need the demise of South Africa to realize Azania. The youth of 1976 and the revolution was operating within an Azanian tradition whose ultimate political goal is the realization of post-conquest Azania as opposed to post-apartheid South Africa. We as Africans must keep the Azanian tradition alive as part of the African liberation to restore the sovereign title to territory and bring an end to white settler colonialism, not just apartheid. It is interesting that history repeats itself, because what has happened in South Africa recently with the Rhodes movement and Fees Must Fall, the Rhodes movement was on a path of the Azanian liberation, just like the youth of 1976. But their motive was diverted to Fees Must Fall, just like the motive of the June 1976 revolution was diverted to COSAS and UDF and the UDF, who fought for equal rights and operated within the democratization paradigm. Both the Rhodes Must Fall and Youth Revolution were operating within an Azanian tradition in line with decolonization. Now, today we can ask ourselves a question in terms of the Constitution and just South Africa in itself. While the entire Constitution is based on the epistemological paradigm of the European conqueror, it is based on the law of the European conqueror to the exclusion of the law of the indigenous conquered people. It reduces the law of the indigenous people to what they call customary law and grants it to the lowest status, basically. It doesn't mention Ubuntu, which is African culture, and uses it as a foundation of the law of the indigenous people. Therefore, it is an extension or reconfiguration of the 1652 conquest. Section 25 of the Constitution attempts to address the land question without mentioning the conquest of 1652. Section 25 of the Constitution, in its attempt to attend to the land question, reduces the issue of sovereign title to territory to private property law. This takes the form of making the rights of individual private property a fundamental right. Therefore, it does not answer the question of historic justice, namely, how did the white settlers come to own the land? The entire constitution needs to be abolished and the entire territory restored to its indigenous people. This is in contrast to what is currently happening in the political environment in the form of amendment of Section 25 and the expropriation bill. This is the extended transformation. The current debate in South Africa of land expropriation without compensation will not realize in decolonization. Now, I would be interested, I know we're closing, but I'd be interested to hear what Brother Thapelo thinks about this and basically just hear what a few people think as well before we close. Thank you.
Thank you. Brother Thapelo, you have your hand raised. You are muted.
I also have a question for some of the leaders who are on this panel today. And let me start by saying welcome the Reverend Frank Chikane, a very distinguished leader of the liberation movement. One of the people who was there in the heat of the 1980s. I'd like to just to make everybody else in the diaspora aware of the significance of his presence here today. Yes, I mean, just to reiterate what I mentioned earlier, the struggle for liberation in Tanzania has to be distinguished from a mere fight for human rights. Because we have human rights right now, but we have no land. We do not control the commanding heights of our economy. We are even dominated upon by other people who were not in Tanzania prior to 20 years ago. So our struggle was fundamentally for the return of the dispossessed land, for the development and perpetuation of an African identity, from which other forms of advancements would then develop themselves. From an African identity, you are then able to create an African-focused education system. For instance, let's ask if any of the leaders on this panel today are mentioned in the history curriculum of our schools today. I doubt it. These are some of the people who have to be known by the generations after them. And from that, mentally, those generations would then know that these are the people that we have to be proud about, and not necessarily somebody who is based far away from my country. I believe that decolonization and liberation is a very bitter route to take, but it has to be taken. Otherwise, we are going to keep mimicking a society that only treats symptoms of a deeper situation. I hope I've outlined my view on that. My question to Dr. Ishmael Mkabela, to the Reverend Chikane, to the advocate, and to the other people who were in the movement in 76 in Soweto, is there is a reference to the Bethel treason trial. I mean, seeing that we are hosted by a legal institution here, the Bethel treason trial, which was a secretive trial through which people from Soweto and other townships, including Zef Mutupeng, John Ganya, Maxinas, Benintwele of Pretoria, Hamilton Keke of East London, Stembele Kaya of Soweto, and others were convicted of planning and leading the uprising that began in Soweto and followed up in Kagiso. How much of an influence did these people have on the events of the day? That is my question to the leadership.
Baba Ishmael, you're muted.
Thank you very much. Easily forget these things. I was making a statement that I was deliberately trying to draw in my brother Frank Chikani to this. If I understand the question you are posing, is that how does an individual influence the course of history? I think we all occupy various corners or spaces in our lives. We can be asking that those who are running some institutions, how do their institutions contribute to answering the questions, Tapelo, you have raised? I am chairman of the Steve Biko Foundation. Maybe it's good that some of the things which you are talking about, I say, I take them back to that platform and say, how do we contribute to continuously making a contribution to changing this society for the ideals we have often stood for? But I think for me, I believe that the many of us, young and old, who are here, if you have a way in which you feel you can significantly contribute to a future we aspire for all of us, raise it and see how we can also lay our hands in support, put our shoulder on the wheel together with you. I will certainly find it a heavy burden for any generation or any individual to take on themselves that they can bring about change in isolation of others. I think each of those contributions we are making, together with the lawyers who are in this room, in your space, there are certain things which you see, which I can't see. Make me see them, let me appreciate them. And I'll also, in other platforms, also raise issues which we can do immediate and long term. But I still believe that it is important that we also think in a Pan-Africanist way, or actually to put it broader, we think in terms of we're Africans, we have our people in the diaspora, and we are where we are because even prior to the liberation of our African countries, we were talking together, we were in conversation together about possibilities for the future. And I think let's see how we can strengthen what we have started today. I hope I have not spoken in circles, but if I have, there's a way in which we can take the conversation even offline and see how we can best deal with issues. And I think if my brother Frank is here, I would say it may be good that somewhere his voice is heard. I have also seen other brothers and comrades here, but unfortunately we don't have all the time in the world. We can be asking after this, what is the way forward? Is it the end of a conversation? And if it's a good conversation, why is it being ended in this fashion?
Thank you. I don't know if we have any final remarks before we close out. I'll give it a minute if anyone wants to jump in. Okay, hearing none. First, I want to say thank you so much to our panelists. We really appreciate hearing your perspective, and we really do stand in solidarity with the continual decolonization of the apartheid state inside of South Africa. So I would say to our listeners and our watchers and everyone who participated inside of this, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is the Decolonization of Human Rights Clinic. We are a branch of the National Council of Black Lawyers, and we hope to host more discussions, push out more information, and expose our people internationally to all of the issues that we are fighting against the systems of colonialism and imperialism. So again, thank you all, and I hope you all have a great day.